All right. All right, well, we'll let everybody filter in momentarily and then we'll get started. We've got a great panel today, so looking forward to the discussion. Give it just 1 second. All right, well, we will go ahead and start. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Tatyana Bolton. I'm the policy director at our Street Institute for Cybersecurity and Emerging Threats. We have a very interesting panel for you all today, including a hands-on demonstration, which will be fascinating. So let me just introduce the panel, and then I'm going to hand it over to one of the panelists to discuss and introduce the system that we'll be looking at. So we have Phil Menzer, who's the director for the Observatory on Social Media from Indiana University. Pik-Mai who is a PhD student in complex systems and network science at Indiana University. Yes, I'm sorry. Cory Simpson, who is a senior advisor at the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and currently at Ankara. And Rob Morgus, the senior director at the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. We also have Todd O'Boyle, who's the senior manager for public policy at Twitter. So we welcome you all and thank you for coming. So I'm going to take it over to Phil, who's going to introduce Indiana University's very interesting observatory on social media. And we'll introduce that and then we'll kind of go over to the actual demonstration. Phil?
Thank you so much, Tatyana. Thank you for organizing this panel. And I will share my screen to give an overview of the Observatory on Social Media and the work that we do. We do both research and some education and tool development, but I will focus here, just give you an overview of the tools that we are developing, and that will also sort of give you an idea of the type of research that we're doing. So let me dive into it. First of all, let me just say that all this work is the work of a lot of people that are affiliated with our observatory, and especially my colleagues, co-PIs, and wonderful students and researchers in our lab. And I want to acknowledge their work, as well as funding from various agencies that we're really grateful for. So if you go to the Observatory on Social Media, which, by the way, we call it OSoMe, OSoMe for Observatory on Social Media, but we think it is awesome. You will see a list of various tools on the website. So I will give you an overview of some of this right now. So Hoaxy is actually our latest tool. The idea here is that we collect a lot of data from Twitter. This is one of the ways in which we collaborate with Twitter. Twitter makes a lot of data available to our lab. And we focus in particular here on tweets that are about COVID vaccines. And we categorize them as we categorize some of them that have links to a number of low credibility sources that are labeled by third-party fact checkers as misinformation about the vaccines. And then we try to correlate that with hesitancy data from either at the state level or the county level here in the US, as well as vaccine update data. And currently we're looking and we're observing that there is a strong correlation between these factors. So those locations that have higher levels of misinformation about the vaccines also tend to have higher levels of hesitancy. So this is some of the research that we are working on right now. And the Covaxi dashboard provides a way to navigate through this data through various visualizations, and we hope it's useful for people. Another tool is a simulation, a model, an agent-based model called EchoDemo that is meant to illustrate the mechanisms that may lead to the emergence of polarized and segregated echo chambers on social media. So these are mechanisms that exist on all social media platforms. They're just basically inherent to our own behavior. For example, our tendency to connect to like-minded users and to disconnect from people that we dislike or disagree with. This is known as homophily. And also the fact that whenever we are exposed to some information, there is some chance that we are going to be influenced by the information that we see, at least to a small degree. So this model lets you play with parameters that capture these mechanisms. And I will show you a little run of one of these simulations. So we initially assume that people have opinions spread across a spectrum from blue to red, from progressive to conservative at random, and also that people are connected at random. And then they share things that reflect their own opinions, and their friends are exposed to those posts and may possibly be influenced a little bit. There is a parameter that regulates that. And then when people are exposed to things that they strongly disagree with, they may unfollow or unfriend that person. And that's represented here by these dashed lines. These are connections that are cut. And in this model here, they're replaced with completely random connections, which are these solid lines that appear. And so as you see the simulation unfold, you observe two things. One is that initially all those colors, all that diversity of opinion is going away, and the users are grouping into two groups that are very homogeneous. One where, everybody's color red, another one where everybody's color blue. So opinions are becoming polarized around these two poles. And secondly, the users are sorting themselves out into these two clusters or groups or communities with very little connection to users in the other community. And inevitably, for a broad range of values for the parameters, the simulation ends up in this situation where you completely, are cut out. Now, this is not meant to mean that this is exactly what we observe in a real social media environment. Of course, this is a very, very, very simplified model, but it gives a sense of how these basic ingredients of unfriending and social influence push us or accelerate our normal tendency of sorting ourselves out in these echo chambers. Another app that we have, it's called Fakey, and you can play with it. It's a game. You can play with it on the web or through an app that you can get on your phone. Simulates a social a news feed like the one that you might, similar to the ones that you might see on Facebook or Twitter. But only posts that have links to news articles. And we track a number of sources. Some are mainstream sources and some are low credibility sources. And then people who play the game have to decide whether to share something or like something or maybe flag it for fact checking. And you get points for doing the right thing, which is not share, links from low credibility sources. And we have observed in our research that as people play this game, they get better at recognizing and separating articles from different sources, from more reliable or less reliable sources. We've also noticed with an experiment where we show people that a number that sort of simulates the engagement of a particular post. We tell them this many people have shared or liked this item. And we've noticed that this exposure actually creates a vulnerability because people are more likely to share and less likely to fact check articles from low credibility sources if they think that those are very popular, that those are liked and shared by many people. Okay, a lot of our research and work revolves around abuse and manipulation. So we worked on social bots for many years. We were one of the first groups that studied social bots and actually coined the term social bots. Back in 10 years ago, we looked at first instances of bots that were retweeting each other thousands of times to promote someone, or targeting an influential from a number of fake accounts with links to fake news websites in order to try to amplify the visibility of this fake news. In 2006, we collected a lot of data from Twitter again regarding the spread of articles from low credibility sources. So what you see on the left is what we call a diffusion network. This is a network where the nodes are Twitter users and links represent retweets. And the size of the node represents the influence of an account. And so this particular network is the diffusion network for this particular article on the right, which is one of the most popular fake news articles during the 2016 elections. This claim that the Clinton campaign was involved in satanic rituals, which, by the way, was a precursor to today's QAnon conspiracies. And this came from InfoWars. So these big nodes at the center are the accounts associated with InfoWars, which of course has been suspended from all major social media platforms more recently, but we're talking here about 2016. But you also observe a bunch of nodes on the periphery that also are kind of influential, and you see that they're colored in red. And those are accounts that we believe are inauthentic, or at that time were inauthentic and mostly automated. And our analysis suggests that these accounts were all controlled by the same entity that was, of course, pushing out this misinformation, the Alex Jones organization. And they were successful in exposing a lot of users to those tweets that came from InfoWars. So that's that's the network for one particular article. Now imagine aggregating that across hundreds of thousands of these articles, and you get a huge network. This is a sort of a portion of that network. And in purple here, we see links that represents retweeting of claims from low credibility sources. In orange, claims from fact-checking sources. And you see another kind of homophoby, that people who are vulnerable to sharing misinformation tend to connect to other people who are also vulnerable to sharing misinformation. Not only that, but we looked at, as we went towards the core of this misinformation network, we saw more and more evidence for potentially automated accounts. And I'll say later in a minute about how we evaluated this. So these inauthentic accounts can manipulate the information ecosystem in multiple ways. For example, they can target influentials. This plot says that the more an account is likely to be automated, the more it's likely to mention influential accounts when it posts low credibility articles. So the yellow dot here is a bot, for example, that responded to news articles from major news organizations that mentioned Trump. And in his or its replies, there was a link to a false news articles from InfoWars that claimed that 3 million votes in the presidential elections had been cast by illegal aliens. And so this bot was trying to make sure that these very influential users, Trump had just been elected president, would be exposed to this particular false narrative, because he would see in his feed that major news organizations were talking about him, and he would see this link to this false claim. Once a piece of information spreads virally, it's very hard to notice the presence of inauthentic accounts, because those often act in the very first few seconds. So what this plot says that if you look at like the first 10 seconds, you notice the presence of potentially inauthentic accounts. Later on, once something goes virally and it's spread by thousands of people, you don't observe that effect anymore. So bots can be efficient when they're controlled by the same entity that's posting the misinformation and amplifying that view, like we saw in the earlier network picture. And then finally, automated accounts can flood the space. The same account can share the same link to the same claim thousands of times. So this idea of flooding the information ecosystem is also something that a type of abuse that can be effective. Now, if you look at retweets, I won't go into the details of this picture, but what it tells you is that most of the retweets of low credibility articles come from humans, okay, accounts with low bot scores. But if you look at who those humans retweet when they tweet links to low credibility articles, they retweet humans, but they also retweet bots. So this is another illustration about how inauthentic accounts can amplify the spread of misinformation. So I've been talking about these inauthentic or automated accounts. How do we tell? So we developed a tool called BottomMeter. It's a machine learning tool. It fetches data from Twitter about an account's profile and the recent tweets and their friends and followers, and it computes a large number, over 1,000 different features, and then uses a supervised learning mechanism. That is, it compares those features with accounts that have been labeled by hands by other researchers to tell whether an account seems similar to other accounts that we know are possibly inauthentic. And so this tool is available to anybody who wants to play with it. One of the challenges of this kind of approach is that there isn't one kind of bot, just like there isn't one kind of human. There are many, many different kinds of abuses that happen. Anyone who starts and tries to manipulate the system will come up with their own method. So when we look at different data sets from different research groups, including ours, in some cases, the bots are easy to separate from the humans. And in other cases, they're very hard. So this is one of the challenges of current bot detection algorithms. And we are trying to address them in a couple of ways. Our current BottomMeter version has two algorithms. One is called BottomMeter Lite. And the idea here is that it trains on different subset of the data in order to maximize the coverage, maximize the recall. So its capability to detect bots that are different from the ones that it's trained on. And another approach, which is the algorithm which is behind the main version of BottomMeter right now, is that instead of training a single classifier, we train many different classifiers, one for each of a different type of bots that we observe in the wild. And then these different classifiers compete with each other. And the ones that say, yeah, I'm pretty sure that this account looks like this kind of bot, then that classifier kind of wins. And so this is a way to try to recognize accounts that are different from each other and possibly different from examples that we have in our training data. So our current version of BottomMeter looks like this. You get a score for each type of account. So you might score highly on self-declared bots, but you may look innocent if you compare it with, let's say, I don't know, fake follower accounts and things of that nature. Another tool that we have is called Hoaxy. Hoaxy is a way to visualize the diffusion of information on Twitter. So those networks that I showed you earlier are the example of things that you can get from Hoaxy. There are actually two different versions of Hoaxy. One that does a live search from Twitter. So we just submit the query to the Twitter search API and then visualize the retweet, mention, and quote and reply network. And the other one is an article search, which works kind of like a search engine. So we actually track a bunch of low credibility and fact-checking sources, and we index them so that we could search these, like a search engine. And at the same time, we get every tweet that has links to these articles. So you can submit a query and you can get a bunch of articles that match your query. And then you can search for tweets that share links to those articles and see what those diffusion networks look like. So you might see what are the different communities that share particular articles, or whether there are some particularly influential super spreaders. And this tool is also integrated with BottomMeter so that the nodes are colored according to their bot score. So you can focus on accounts that are more likely to be human or more likely to be automated, and so on. Like I said, it's integrated, so you can click on a node, you can see what this account shared, and you can look at the tweets from the Twitter website. You can update its score using the BottomMeter tool, and so on. Now, so far I've talked about these inauthentic accounts, and I've used automated inauthentic bots, these words kind of interchangeably. But a lot of bad actors don't necessarily use social bots. They don't use accounts that are actually automated. So as an example, let me show you this account. This account is, if you look at it, well, before Twitter suspended it, if you looked at it, it looked like a regular politically active account. It was definitely not automated, okay? There was a human behind it. However, now if I show you, oh, look at all these other accounts, now you would say, okay, this is suspicious, right? They look suspiciously similar to each other. They have similar images. They use hashtags in similar ways and websites. Obviously, they're created from templates, even though some of them purport to be pro-Trump accounts and other to be anti-Trump accounts. And this is a type of fraud. You know, these accounts would try to raise money saying, hey, I'm a pro-Trump, you know, and I'm raising, you know, money for the campaign, anti-Trump, pro-Trump. So they were trying to get money from both sides. Okay, so this is a kind of fraud. So we are developing algorithms to detect these kind of coordinated inauthentic behavior, as the platforms call them. And we have actually have a paper that is going to be presented at the ICWSM conference very soon, in a few days. And so this is an example of a network that where the clusters of nodes of the same colors represent accounts that are most likely coordinated. They're very similar to each other. In this particular case, they're similar because they all share the same handles. So these are accounts that are cheating and evading detection by sharing handles, so that they change their identity. They make it look like they're someone else. We use many different criteria to find likely coordinated accounts. For example, on the top left, we see accounts that are sharing, that are retweeting the same tweets. And these are accounts who are sharing links to low credibility information about COVID-19. The Hong Kong example here, this is Pik-Mai's work. These are accounts that are sharing the same images, or images that are very, very similar to each other in a suspicious way. All right, yeah, you and I might share the same image. That's not suspicious. But what if we both share 100 images and they are exactly the same images, right? So this is what we call like suspiciously similar. And we found these kinds of accounts engaging in the Hong Kong protests, both pro and anti protest movements. On the bottom left, we see accounts that are retweeting the same accounts in the context of white helmets disinformation campaigns in Syria. The pump and dump picture, these are fraud accounts that are trying to pump up the price of a cryptocurrency. And then once it goes above a certain level, they sell it and they they make money that way. This is actually a common fraud scheme, and so we detected these accounts because they are all tweeting in a synchronized way. They're all tweeting at the same time because they're trying to get that price to go up at the same time. They exploit the fact that some investors tweet for names of cryptocurrency, for example, to catch if there is buzz about some crypto coins, and then they buy it if they think that there is some buzz. And then, of course, in the domain of politics, there is a lot of these kind of coordinated inauthentic behavior. On the top left, each cluster here, this is a group of accounts that are posting the exact same sequences of hashtags. These are accounts that either have been hacked, and so they're controlled by a single entity, or they voluntarily give their Twitter credentials to some app that then tweets on their behalf. And in other cases, we see that humans are engaged in this kind of coordinated behavior. For example, there was this case about a bunch of teenagers in Arizona that were paid by a political action committee to just copy and paste narratives from a Google Doc. And so these teenagers would then create fake accounts to get more money. And this was used to spread a lot of misinformation about the election and about COVID. And so these are some of the cases of this coordination. And so the last tool that I'm going to mention is called Botslayer, and Pik-Mai will give a demo of it in a second. And the idea here was to try and make it easier for anyone to set up their own infrastructure in the cloud, to look at streams of tweets matching their own interests, and then see if we could detect out of these tweets some narratives that are maybe trending and that are possibly pushed and amplified by either automated accounts or by coordinated accounts. So here's a picture, and Pik-Mai will show you a live one in a second. So so basically, once you set up this system, you have a dashboard that lets you navigate and look at different entities, whether they are links or images or media or phrases and so on. Here on the, and then you can visualize them with Hoaxy. So here, for example, this network on the bottom right is one that we noticed once where we were looking at Botslayer, and we noticed that there was this very suspicious cluster of accounts that were likely bots. These red dots here, these were Russian bots that were pushing a particular false video about Bill Browder. And what's interesting here, and this is actually a compliment to Twitter, is that just as we were watching these things pop up on our dashboard in real time, they were being suspended by Twitter. So obviously Twitter had some automated systems somewhat similar to ours that was detecting this kind of manipulation and taking them down very, very quickly. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here, and I'm sorry I went a little bit long, and I'm gonna let Twitter give a brief demo of this particular system of Botslayer. Pik-Mai?
Yep, I will take over. So I'll share my screen. Hello, everybody. My name is Pik-Mai, and I'm the PhD student who is behind Bosslayer. I'm the designer and the backend developer of Bosslayer. And what you're seeing here, everybody's seeing this screen, right?
Yes.
So what you're seeing here is the current version of Bosslayer dashboard. Before we go into this, there is a short portion of the tutorial that I would like everybody to watch to sort of get a sense of how easy it is to set up one of your own Bosslayer. And just a short snapshots of the setup procedure. There are screenshots that you can follow to set up your own Bosslayer on AWS. So without further ado, I'll start here. Sorry.
So I think Pik-Mai is going to show a little bit of a video. Is that right, Pik-Mai?
Wait, is everybody seeing the video or no?
No, no, we're not.
Oh, you're not. Let's see. I guess the video is not playing in the screen sharing mode in panel. And so what I'm gonna do is to go through the step quickly, because the main spirit here is to show you how easy it would be for a person who doesn't have external knowledge to sort of get your own Bosslayer. So the easiest way, for example, is to set up one on AWS. So of course you have to have an AWS account. And of course you will also have to register for your own Twitter account and get your own Twitter developer account to get API keys. I'll show you why those are important later. And once you get those done, then follow the instructions here for AWS user, which is the easiest option. First, once you log into your console, you'll see that there is an EC2 option. You click that, and it will bring you to this page here where there's a big blue button that says Launch Instance. You click that. And here, it will bring you to a page where you can search for what's called machine image on Amazon Web Service. And the name of our machine image for Bosslayer is a secret string. It's a very long string. And the way you obtain that string is by completing our form, our agreement form. So that says that you have read our end user license agreement, and also know that our Bosslayer uses certain open source license and such and such. So here is the form link. You click here, it will bring you to a Google form where you will fill in your information. And when you hit submit, it will show you the secret string. Now, once you enter that secret string, you will find a machine image which you can select and go to the next step. I won't go into details into what you type in. There are detailed instructions here. And after a few steps of clicking next, you'll be able to have a machine up and running. Now, once you have a machine, it will look something like this, where you'll click the config page and enter. For new machine, you enter your first password and confirm it. Or here I have already entered my own password. And in order to collect your own data and detect manipulation of information in real time using your own data, you have to have an API key from Twitter developer account. And we, thanks to Twitter, uses what Twitter provides, the official Twitter API to collect data. And once you input these API keys that you obtain from Twitter on their Twitter developer account, you can enter what you want to track. So there are a few things you can track. You can track hashtag, keywords, URLs, and you can also follow user ID and search for location. We recommend that for starter, you try the track entity. Here we have an example of tracking vaccination and vaccine-related information. For this instance here, this is for demo, and therefore we stop the collection sooner. This instance here is currently not collecting data. We have old data that we have already collected. So in order to find those, we can click this time box here and go back. For example, January 6th, the previous screen that I have is this one. It was cached, so it's faster for demo. So you can click here and click timestamp, time warp to warp back to a previous dashboard representing a certain time. So let's say that you missed something happening, but you have already collected the data as a user, and therefore you can use your own data to look back in the history to look for things that you may have missed. And this is exactly what we're doing here. So let's say that we investigate the top row here. I'll go through each column of the top row. The first column is BS level, which stands for what you may have guessed, how bad each entity is. So you can search.
And for Botslayer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Completely appropriate. Okay. So you can sort the columns, lower the better, higher the worse. So the top one is obviously the worst, and the entity can be something like hashtag links. You can filter for those, pictures, etc. The column of Hoaxy are links that you can use to investigate the networks of the content that is containing this, for example, handle. So let's try the left one, which will show you a star of account. They're all red. Red here means bad. The color bar here, the higher ones are likely bot accounts, and the lower ones, which are blue, are likely human accounts. And you see a lot of reds here, which means that this group of people are probably pretty suspicious. Not that they are not that they're absolutely bad. It's up to the user who decide whether they're bad or not. So you will have to do your own investigation into, for example, clicking into this account, etc., etc. So you may have asked, you may ask that what's the difference between the left button and the right button? They are both Hoaxy, right? They're both Hoaxy link. The left button uses data that's collected in your own Bosslayer machine. And that means that it uses tweets that contains these query terms. In addition, it also contains this entity. So it's an AND operation, it's a smaller set. The right button here looks at the live Twitter. So it will search on the live Twitter for this handle, for example, if I click on it, and look for the recent tweets, the network of the recent tweets that contain this handle. So it's a difference between using your own data or using the live data of Twitter.
Pik-Mai, can I interrupt you for a second? I just wanted to point out that this particular account that was central in this example, this page 36 news, looks to be a news source from Nigeria. And so very often these accounts automatically post links to news that appear on their websites. And that's why they appear to have a high bot score, because usually they're not controlled by humans. They just automatically post everything, just like an RSS feed. Sorry, Pik-Mai, continue.
No, that's a very good point. And therefore, for example, here in the live Twitter, you can see that the red dot, the red big dot here, page 36 news is red, but not everything around it is red, right? Although it may look suspicious, it always requires some further investigation for the user to figure out. And Bosslayer in and of itself, the spirit of Bosslayer is an information filtering tool. So we don't make the decision, we don't make the hard decision for the user that this is fake, this is bad, and this is good, this is real. We don't do that. We show user what could be potentially suspicious and let them figure it out. So there is that. Let's go back to the dashboard. So we have discussed the Hoaxy tab. Let's move on to the search tab. Once you investigate the network, you may want to know a little bit more about this handle, for example. We talked about it being a Nigeria news source. If you click on the Google search button, you may figure it out. There's a Nigeria news source. It locates in Nigeria and it says news. And also you can look at, for example, discussion on Reddit that may have included that handle, which unfortunately there's none. And there are also things like searching on Twitter, searching on 4chan, which I won't click here, searching on Facebook, and searching on YouTube. And in the future, we can add more. Now, the last seen button is how long ago the content is compared to the current timestamp, which is 5 months ago. It's January. Tweets is number of tweets in the last 4 hours, number of accounts in the last 4 hours. The trendiness is how bursty the content come out. It's basically a ratio between the amount of content in the last 4 hours compared to the last 8 hours, last 4 to 8 hours. The coordination is an algorithm that we design to try to find coordinated accounts in the backend. Through all the tweets that we have collected in the last 8 hours, we try to look for accounts that seems coordinated and look at how much of the content in this entity that are generated by potentially coordinated accounts. And botness is obviously potentially automated accounts. This botness here is average bot score, basically. And the bot score algorithm is the BottomMeter light that we have discussed before. And so you may wonder, why do we want to use Bosslayer here instead of all the tools that are already out there, for example, Hoaxy and BottomMeter. Hoaxy and BottomMeter is kind of like a more retroactive tools, a set of retroactive tools. You know something happened and you go and search for it. Whereas Bosslayer is a tool for any user without expert knowledge, programming skills, to try to actively detect potential manipulation of information on Twitter in real time.
Thank you.
And
Great.
that's it. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Pik-Mai. That was fascinating. You know, as we all know, the rise of social media platforms have, you know, sort of introduced the spread of this misleading information online. And as you mentioned, either by bot or by person, you know, we've seen a lot of this spread throughout the ecosystem. So we appreciate your demonstration here today. It was very interesting. I wanted to ask you before we kind of go on to the other panelists, what has been one of the biggest challenges in developing some of these tools?
Very good question. We have a very limited set of human resources, and there is a surprisingly huge demand for this tool. And therefore, we are constantly chasing demand for feature and updates. And also, the algorithm of detection of coordination and also the ranking algorithm here for the BS level requires a lot of thinking, let's say. So currently we use a supervised model where we trained our algorithm using manually labeled data set. And the data set comes from us, the researcher in our group. We have 3 people labeling a bunch of data set using majority vote and training a machine learning model on it. And you can imagine that's a lot of work. And we want to improve on it, and it will take a long time to do so. And while we're doing it, people out there, bad actors out there are also evolving. So we're constantly in this cat and mouse run that trying to catch up. And when we catch up, they evolve. And when they evolve, we will get better as well. And it never ends.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any sort of like, you know, eureka moments as you were developing this? Did you sort of, have you come to any sort of realizations either about sort of the spread of misinformation and how sort of bots work and how, you know, malign actors try to use these accounts?
Well, actually, when we first developed Botslayer, we didn't have the coordination column there. If you go onto our website and watch our tutorial video, which is on the previous version, you don't see the coordination column there. We started without it. And the idea of coordinate the counts sort of becoming more mainstream happened last year and happened before election. It really is an idea that I think sort of added a lot of colors to Bosslayer and improved the performance. So it was a moment of inspiration that I believe is worth sharing.
Interesting. Thank you.
And I will add that this is Pik-Mai's dissertation work. His dissertation is specifically on developing algorithms to detect this kind of coordinated behavior. So there's a lot of research going on behind the tool.
Absolutely. That's very evident. So Todd, I want to go to you. If we can, oh yeah, here we go. So Twitter works with Indiana University and OSoMe. Can you tell us a little bit about how you all are integrated and work together?
Sure. And I'll start by saying thank you to you, Tatyana, and R Street for inviting me to join this esteemed panel for a timely conversation about such an interesting topic. And thank you to Filippo and Pik-Mai for the demo. I think the best way to answer this is by saying that people come to Twitter to take part in global conversation, and it's fair to say the service has transformed the way information is shared and engaged with around the world. Above all, we want people to trust what they see on Twitter, and so we work to elevate credible information while also working to mitigate the spread of unreliable or misleading information. As an aside, I'll confess I felt a measure of pride as Filippo was stated that Twitter was actioning apparently inauthentic accounts in real time as they were charting on the tools. But all of this is why we've maintained a long and fruitful partnership with the IU team, with IU and the OSoMe team. We continue to benefit from this partnership as we build to continue to build what we call a community of defenders, meaning we're partnering with outside researchers and stakeholders while also continuing our ongoing investment internally on our teams to make sure that we're addressing the reliability of information on our platform. You know, when it comes to the tools, they're powerful. One that always stood out to me is Hoaxy, which helps investigating how information is spreading through social media networks. But I think if I were to step back for a moment, the collaboration with OSoMe is a good example of how we look at the bigger picture of and particularly disinformation. You know, to borrow the famous Camille Francois coinage, ABC, actors, behavior, and content. So with regard to actors and behavior, we have to ask questions like, is this coming from a foreign troll farm? Is this content being spread for inauthentic reasons? Is there a cluster of accounts orchestrating disinformation campaigns? That sort of thing. Tools like these can help us understand on those first 2 points, the A and the B, but that's before we even get to the C, content. So it's particularly challenging because sometimes the most effective and pernicious disinformation campaigns are actually trading inaccurate information. So we have to look at all three, A, B, and C. But again, just to reiterate, that's why partnerships like these are so critical as we work on building out the community of defenders in and out of industry and in and out of academia.
Yeah. And, you know, I will say that, you know, just watching those dots, you know, move in your demonstration and the separation, you know, it's sort of, it helps to visualize the way in which information is flowing and to who and how. It's very interesting. So obviously all of this is very interesting. I think the most important connection here is how we can get this information into the hands of the people that can make the biggest impact with that information. And so, you know, Cory, you've spent many years in service and in the government and in the policy realm particularly. And so I wanted to ask you, how do tools like these, and particularly sort of, you know, tools like Hoaxy and Botslayer, how can we get them into the hands of policymakers, and can they be helpful and useful as policymakers are striving to address some of these challenges of misinformation and disinformation?
Sure. One, I just want to echo what Todd shared. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of the panel today and have a conversation on something as important as this. And also, thank you for I guess, Indiana University. It's what a tremendous you know, capability you've developed here, and excited to see it proliferate. And I'll say, you know, just sort of contextualizing this challenge. It's hard, right? So I initially crossed paths with Rob and Tatyana at the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and you start at the outset with, is disinformation a cybersecurity problem? Because oftentimes your systems work, right, as they're intended to work, but you still have a pollution of the information environment. And so let's just skip that debate, but that was a big part of the initial discussion at the Cyberspace Solarium. And let's just say that it is. And when you begin placing, I think disinformation, it just as with any policy, strategy has to drive policy. And so you frame this and you say, okay, all of the policy in this area is trying to be more proactive. you've seen a lot of conversation at the national level on Defend Forward from the DoD with persistent engagement, or from US Cyber Command. Well, how do you become more proactive in this space? And that's really, I think, a very difficult question when you, especially considering the two biggest limiting factors, is because you're focused on the information environment predominantly in the United States. We're not a nation that uses our intelligence community or military domestically. So you set them aside. So how do you do this? Well, it takes partnerships like this. It takes companies working with academia. It takes this sort of an effort, I think, to really do things proactively, which it comes in the form of education. And it comes in the form of digital literacy and civics education, which is what we echoed in the Cyberspace Solarium report. And I also think that, what are you educating on? And what are you trying to reveal, especially as you prevent disinformation? And just as a point, I'm sure to all the panelists, we understand, but to the larger audience, the distinction between disinformation and misinformation, really one of intent, right? So disinformation is intended to deceive. Misinformation, not necessary. With the intent to deceive, it could just be bad information. It could also be an echoing of disinformation without the intent. So one's disinformation can become misinformation as it's spread throughout the information environment. I think one of the real tools that capabilities like this help with is authenticity and transparency. And as you bring that to the information environment, that is something that is very valuable. And it especially, when you put things in the context of the First Amendment, where it's so challenging to regulate content, things like this are, more accessible and need to be, frankly, applied at a greater scale. So Tatyana, I hope that helped. With that, I'll turn it over.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so, you mentioned some of these sort of broader efforts that the commission pushed forward. So Rob, I don't know if you wanted to go in a little bit more in terms of the recommendations on some of these topics that the commission made in terms of disinformation and education particularly.
Yeah, happy to. And I actually think so in the context, well, I should start by saying Philippe and Pik-Mai, great presentation, really interesting tool. In the context of sort of the tool itself and some of the research that Filippo and Pik-Mai just talked about, a few questions sort of come to mind that are sort of subsets of what you just asked, Tatyana. One is, how do you encourage more of this research? Because it's clearly sort of net positive for the ecosystem. And this is all from sort of a public policy perspective. Two, how do you leverage this type of research and the information from this type of research for public good, right? And then three, how do you use this research to inform policy, which is, I think, sort of what Cory was just talking about there a second ago. On question one, I think, it's pretty straightforward. Pik-Mai talked about the challenges, human capital, resources, et cetera, right? I would add data potentially, maybe not in the case of this particular project, but for many projects, it might be somewhat similar. Access to data from social media companies, from platforms, from whomever is a major barrier for more research like this. So, federal government, I don't think we want them controlling this type of research. I think that's maybe bridged too far. I think when you start talking about the information space, disinformation, social media, et cetera, I think you get into sort of pretty difficult territory pretty quickly, but you can sort of through NSF and others provide sort of scientific research grants to institutions like this. I also think that there's some good work that the federal government can be doing, working with social media companies, potentially working with government sources of data on the information environment and sort of plugging researchers into that. There's been a proposal on Capitol Hill for a long time for something called the Social Media Data Threat and Analysis Center. It's actually passed through law. And it's right now envisioned to sort of be spun up by the Director of National Intelligence. There are people talking about maybe we want to actually move that to Department of Homeland Security, but this is basically an area or a place where social media companies can plug in with the intelligence community and other sources of government data and potentially sort of bring researchers into the fold so that we can actually do a better job of sharing information on threats in the information environment, on trends that we're seeing in the information environment. And then I think when you sort of talk about leveraging this type of thing for public good, you know, one of the core recommendations that the commission made in a subsequent white paper, not in our final report, but in the subsequent white paper, was essentially spinning up a program that provides more resources to entities, non-governmental entities that are essentially sunlighting on disinformation and misinformation as it occurs out in the environment. I think Botslayer does this. I think you can think about sort of the Hamilton 2.0 dashboard that the Alliance for Securing Democracy uses. Some of the work that the Digital Forensics Research Laboratory from Atlantic Council has done in sort of doing more to facilitate and grow and figure out ways to scale some of this work such that you know, we don't have to have a ministry of truth in the United States, because I don't think anyone wants that. And we leave that to a robust and strong civil society that's able to do a lot of that sunlighting for us. So those are sort of the things that this particular conversation piques for me. I think, you know, Cory also mentioned, and you, Tatyana, mentioned the civics education and the digital literacy side of the equation. You know, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at disinformation in the United States. There's the foreign malign influence piece, which is, I think, for me, a counterintelligence issue. There's the supply side, which is where we can begin to sort of use some of the tools that Filippo and Pik-Mai talked about and begin working with the platforms to help sort of manage that. And then there's the demand side. And that's where, to your point and to Cory's point, we need to do a better job of informing people about sort of being more readily able to discern information. We need to be doing a better job to educate people about how our government works, how our democratic institutions work, and other sort of hot button issues that become wedges for folks who would want to sow discord or you know, breed polarization in our society, generally sort of stick their nose into.
Yeah, well, so that also sort of reminds me of one of the first things you said, Phil, when you were presenting on that study that you did when you were giving points for people who were picking the better source data versus the misinformation. And I thought that was really interesting. I mean, Anne Neuberger recently made the comment that all of us have a key role in a digital ecosystem so that we can have confidence and trust in it. Is there something to be learned from that research that you did there? It seems like people who were given some kind of training, right, seem to pick up on these concepts, and perhaps that's something that we can think about as policymakers. Sorry, Phil, that's to you. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I completely agree. And as Robert was saying, there is the supply side and there is the demand side. So we are definitely, very interested to see how tools can help on the digital news literacy side. And in fact, I mentioned earlier Fakey, which is a tool that was developed by a student with that in mind, to see whether a game could be used to inoculate basically people so that they can think when they're actually interacting with information with other users on real social media platforms, when they are accessing news on social media platforms as it happens, it is in their mind that they should think, who is sharing this? Where is this coming from? What is the source? Is this an opinion or is this a piece of real news? Does it come from a trustworthy source or does it come from some source that I've never heard of before? And so Fakey is kind of a fun game that tries to do that. There are other games as well that have been developed by other groups that have been shown to be effective. Other games tend to create scenarios sometimes where you're the bad guy, and so they kind of make you think about how the bad guys can do things to manipulate you. Fake is different because it actually tries to simulate a scenario in which you are actually looking at your news feed. So it's more of a normal situation that you find yourself in, but now you have to think before you share. And so, yeah, that turns out to be effective, to have a significant effect. These effects are not huge. So I need to say that although, you know, we believe that digital literacy is super, super, super important, it's not going by itself to solve the problem. So like Robert was saying, we need to act on both sides. But it is an important piece of the equation. And so we actually want to do even more work on that. It turns out we've learned that a lot of teachers actually use our tools in the classroom, Hoaxy and other network diffusion visualization tools. So right now, what we're trying to do is take this idea of fakie and the network visualization and generalize it into a set of tools that could be used in the classroom in a more organized way. So we're collaborating with colleagues at the University of Minnesota, and we want to develop a set of simulation tools that immerse people in an environment that will be similar to the ones that they see on social media, not only in a passive way, like in Figgy, where you just see a bunch of links to current news, but also assuming that there are actually users out there. And so we can use actually social bots, benign social bots in these simulations to simulate other users and create scenarios where some of these users are just your friends and some others are trying to manipulate you or push false narratives. And so these scenarios could be used in the classroom in appropriate ways, of course, depending on the age of the students. And we think that there is some promise in that direction. So we're excited about that work as well. Interesting.
So Todd, there's a couple questions for you in the chat here. Just throwing them out there for you. Is there a way for Twitter to eliminate bots and coordinated behavior problems by requiring an authenticated human behind each account and attaching that perhaps to a reputation score? Is that something that you all have considered, or, you know, if you want to walk us through sort of how you think about bots and sort of taking them off your systems?
So both great questions. Happy to address both of them. Before I do, I really want to emphasize Filippo's point about news literacy education. It's great to hear these tools are being used in classrooms, particularly with younger people. We're strong supporters of news and media literacy and have supported a number of the leading news literacy nonprofits that are around. Turning to these questions, let's start with Eric's concerning bots. You know, I think we try hard to, we like to dispel some misconceptions and disagreements around bots. We try not to assume that all bots are bad. You know, there are lots of good bots out there, automated accounts that offer things like updates on traffic congestion, or you're often, if you interact with a customer support account on Twitter, that is often an automated account where it has an automated element. And, you know, a daily air quality update, that kind of thing.
Or that news bot we just saw as well.
So there are good news bots, and then there are other news bots that might be sharing unhelpful information. And so what we really want to focus on is not necessarily who created the account or you know, whether it is automated or not, but instead focus on the content of the posts and the behavior of the account. So we have a number of tools on our sides. And so I should say they're evaluating against the Twitter rules, which are available at the Twitter Help Center. You know, our tools are able to screen for, and they're constantly improving, but they screen for things like spammy behavior, repeated posting, like swarming and things like that. So when we take accounts on, we use a number of signals, thousands in fact, to determine whether an account is a bot, an automated account is a bot that would be in violation of our Twitter rules. Every 6 months, we post a report at the Twitter Transparency Center that's available for everyone to review. I think if the audience here today at R Street hasn't seen them, it's really interesting information. I encourage all of you guys to check it out. And then, you know, I would also, just to follow on, suggest that anyone that's interested in this also take a look at the Twitter API. And we've published some recent updates to the API, added some endpoints, and made it even more user-friendly for researchers. We do that in a spirit of transparency and to promote this collaborative community of defenders approach. To Allison's question about reporting misinformation, we have a number of venues and vectors for reporting misinformation. As I mentioned, we have a number of tools that attempt to detect and action problematic content, on the front end before it's even really interacted with. We also have human agent review. We also have trusted flaggers enrolled in our partner support portal program. And then we have human reporting. Now, we have found that human reports are often, like user reports are sometimes the least actionable for any number of reasons. And so one thing that we are working on right now is sort of re-scripting the entire user reporting flow, because it may be that we're not asking the question in the right way to generate the right reports that are useful and identifying violative content. So all of that is to say, we're always looking at improvements we can make on the product side, on the user-facing product side, that can make sure that we're actually soliciting good reports, because reports of content that are not in fact violative are not helping elevate the conversation on the platform. And you can have unhelpful reports for a number of reasons, including malicious or spurious reporting. So it's really on us to make those tools as useful as possible. And it's an ongoing, it's something we're working on as we speak.
Okay, great. Yeah, it sounds like you've got, well, you've got a difficult task in your hands, right? So this is a question sort of to all of you, or Phil, did you want to add to that, add to what Todd was saying?
Yeah, thank you. If I may, I think I want to go back to Eric's question, and because I think it's really, really important. I mentioned flooding, and so Todd mentioned that that's one of the things that they look at. But just to give you an idea, right now the rules of Twitter say that you can post. And Todd, please. If this is incorrect, correct me. I think you can post up to something like 2,400 tweets per day. That's a very high number. You could imagine scenarios in which there are legitimate reasons for doing that, for posting at high volume. But you can also imagine that there are ways to abuse that power. And so we observe that that's an example of a behavior that is done a lot by not necessarily automated accounts. I agree with Todd, the issue of automation is not so important. What is important is what people are doing. But you can do that whether automatically or manually to just to flood the system. And our research shows that a bunch of coordinated accounts that together engage in that behavior, they can penetrate a community and completely control that community and lower the overall quality of information in the system. So, for example, during the elections, Twitter set up some more strict rules and some automated checks. In addition to these limits that I mentioned, if you posted something, very often Twitter would challenge and would say, prove that you're actually a human, solve a CAPTCHA. And I believe that those kind of measures were extremely helpful in controlling the amount of abuse that was happening. I don't think that those rules are still in place right now. I don't know, Todd can say, but that's the kind of discussion that we could be having when it comes to policy, not necessarily policy that comes from government, but also moderation policies by platforms. What is reasonable? Should we challenge, people to prove that they are humans, kind of like Eric is saying? It doesn't mean that we give the stamp of approval, because you might get a stamp of approval today and then abuse the system tomorrow. So we need to constantly see what people are doing. And it's a very interesting question also from the perspective of policy, because if you say, well, before you can post something, you have to prove that you're a human, it's adding a cost, kind of like, a poster stamp. You might think about it, 2 cents, or solve a puzzle. It's increasing the cost of producing information. which is the opposite of what social media platforms have done in the last 10 years. They have lowered the cost of producing information almost to zero. And so this is an interesting debate. By lowering the cost, have we created a situation in which people can flood, and therefore, your freedom to post as much information as you want becomes a limiting factor for someone else's freedom to be heard? So when we're talking about these adding friction or limits to what you can post, not in the sense of what you can post, the content, but how much you can post, there's this trade-off between freedom of speech of one particular individual and freedom of speech of the entire rest of the community that can be flooded by one individual or by one entity that controls many inauthentic accounts. So sorry, I just wanted to throw that in because I think that these are really interesting questions that span the policy, the technical side together, the research and the policy side in interesting ways.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Cory or Todd, sorry, go ahead.
I'll just briefly say, then I'd be glad to hear what Cory and others have to say. If there were one overarching maybe misunderstanding in the conventional wisdom about how our business works, it's that we want to addict people to their phones and we want them, constantly staring at Twitter to sell advertisements is often the allegation. First and foremost, our prime directive in developing our product is giving people a vehicle and a venue to participate in the public conversation. And we find again and again that if people open up and they just open the app and find spammy content, if they find misinformation, if they find abusive content, then they close the app and they stop using Twitter. And so it will always be in our interest to find the right balance that Filippo was referring to. You might recall that during the election phase, we added things like encouraging people to retweet as opposed to quote retweet as opposed to just retweet, encouraging checking, did you read the article that you're tweeting, to make sure that people weren't necessarily sharing things without being fully informed. And we are limiting the appearance in your timeline of tweets that have been labeled as misinformation, denial listing trends. We're always sort of turning knobs and levers to try and find the right different interventions in our product, particularly at moments of what you might think of as like high impact moments around the US election or other major world events, when the threat of mis and disinformation is higher. So I only add that to say, we're always looking at a variety of different interventions we can undertake. We're conducting experiments and see which ones work and which ones maybe don't pan out quite as well, to encourage people to find a conversation online that they want to be a part of, and so that they don't just close the app and never log into Twitter again. So back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you saw, even those sort of small gatekeeping, or not gatekeeping, but, sort of puzzles or challenges or questions, they definitely do, I think, Phil, to your point, kind of slow the pace of publication at the individual level. But you do see some consternation from users. Rob and Cory, to you guys, do you see that as the sort of the right policy direction, somewhere we should go, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and I'm stepping outside of my sort of official commission representation here, and speaking as Rob Morgus and not as a sort of member of the commission. But I think it's important to ask the sort of question about the role that the federal government can play here and the role that the federal government should play here. And I think those are two different things. I think the federal government can play a number of roles, some of which I think, at least personally, would sort of extend beyond what I would like to see them do. What I think they should do in this context is around sort of encouraging more of the behavior that Todd spelled out, that Twitter's already doing, that Facebook and other platforms are beginning to do as well, but make sure that it's being done in a highly transparent way, right? So if we talk about sort of the types of things that we could foresee in terms of sort of social media or platform regulation. We often hear about the antitrust stuff. I'm gonna put that aside because that's not the conversation we're having here. But I think there are useful ways that the federal government could, for example, mandate certain sort of transparency mechanisms around reporting regarding content mediation policies and takedowns. Again, some of the bigs already do this, right? But we want to make sure that this is sort of digestible, easy to understand for the users, and providing guidelines, providing sort of potentially requirements down the road is one thing that the federal government can do. I think there's also progress that could be made on labeling advertisements on platforms, progress that could be made on sort of mandating greater transparency and how you do this to make it such that it's sort of attainable and understandable to the average person who's using a platform. I'm not sure, but mandating something around transparency requirements for how you are being presented the news or the information that you're being presented, right? So how did the news feed sort what you're seeing? How did Twitter prioritize what you're seeing in your feed, right? And helping folks better understand why and how they're seeing the things that they're seeing in their feeds. Again, federal government could step in there and say, you know, you just need to be more, you must have these 5 things and transparency about that. I think, you know, again, labeling foreign actors or foreign folks who are registered as sort of under FARA as foreign agents, labeling the content that we see on social media platforms that is derived from or comes directly from foreign agents, I think is something that we could potentially usefully do here. And then the final piece is on bot accounts themselves. There have been a few different legislative proposals. Feinstein in the 116th Congress, so a couple of years ago now, introduced one that basically said you're going to ban all bots from your platforms. Didn't really go anywhere. Difficult to implement, difficult to define in legal language what exactly a bot is. But you know, some shade of that type of legislation could potentially be interesting and I think beneficial. And I don't think that the social media companies in particular, which can be and often are sort of well-meaning actors, would necessarily want to push back against something like that either. So that's sort of where I see the potential role of FedGov in sort of helping facilitate some greater sort of transparency and understanding about what we're dealing with in this particular ecosystem.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Rob. So there was actually one interesting question from an anonymous attendee who said that the prompt to read articles first on Twitter has been helpful to them on a personal level. Todd, are there any numbers to suggest whether that was effective at a larger scale, or Phil, anything you saw from your side?
I don't have statistics in front of me. I do know that, but if that individual would like to email me separately, I'm happy to drop my email in the chat and see if I can dig up something, but I don't have any numbers prepared today.
I actually wasn't gonna comment on that, but I would be curious too. And I agree with the commenter that that's a very important thing. In fact, studies have shown that on Reddit, for example, a colleague of ours from University of Notre Dame showed that most of the shares are from people who have not read what they are sharing. So I'm sure that motivated this particular intervention from Twitter, and I think I personally think that would be a very useful. My intuition is that it would be a very useful step. The reason I raised my hand is a very, very small point on what Robert was saying about the Feinstein bot. That's the bot disclosure bill. It has not been considered in the U.S. Senate, but a very similar bill has actually passed and being enacted in California. I don't think that the point of that bill is to ban bots. The point was that people who run accounts that are automated should disclose that they are automated. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've been present at some debates where lawyers were debating on whether that would be constitutional or not. I think there are interesting discussions and arguments about that. Perhaps it isn't, but in my opinion, a measure of that kind, I'm agreeing with you, Robert, that could also be useful too, just in terms of transparency. Yeah.
Well, let's bring out our resident lawyer, Cory. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not about to give legal advice. I know that.
Oh, I just really wanted to throw you under the bus there.
No, I do. I think one of the greatest challenges in this space, and I mean, I'm sure Todd could also chime in with this, and anybody, frankly, but it's just that very real challenge of freedom of speech and the notion of that in America and the marketplace of ideas, and how do we preserve that in today's environment? And I think people are sincerely trying. It's just hard. And as we attempt to work through this, I mean, even just getting rid of the anonymous nature of speech carries with it certain implications to the First Amendment. And so as you look to there all the way over to, some kind of arbiter of truth, there's a scale there that I think we have to sort of start trying. And to the credit of the platforms are doing a very good job by leaps and bounds, are getting better and better at this. I mean, from many years ago now, I was on a task force Aries, that was focused a lot at mis and disinformation, surrounded the counterterrorism fight. And, we initially looked at a lot of what's traditionally US platforms, because that's where, recruiting for terrorism was taking place. It's where, the broad marketing was taking place for ISIS. And we're like, we got to work together and figure this out. It's just not also easy from even a partnership perspective, again, getting to the First Amendment issues for platforms to work with like the DOD and DOJ. And you're like, that's, there's implications all over this. I think we can all get behind, terrorism is bad. But then when you start getting through the notion of like, how exactly is that going to work? And what are you going to tell them about my information on your platform? And so, when you layer freedom of speech, when you layer, privacy implications, and you put all this together into today's environment at a scale, it's very complex. And so, for Todd and those that are working through this on a daily basis, I'm interested to hear how you think about it or just frame it.
Well, I think it's important to recall. So one, I appreciate you acknowledging, a spirit of partnership, just how challenging it is to get this right. And we are committed to doing so, but it is a learning process, and every day our interactions on our platform get us closer. I think that if to sort of bring a few threads together, I think it is important to look at the fact that algorithmic choice and transparency are going to take us a long way towards getting us to a better place and better social networks and better platforms. I think we haven't talked about it as much, but we are strong supporters of a national privacy standard that we also think would be key to protecting social media users. I think that if I were to offer, a bigger picture take on what the right role of policy, formal federal government policy here is, it's that any steps we take should not further entrench existing incumbents. So within the confines of how do we not further entrench existing incumbents, how can we all work together to, in this community of defenders model, to improve the quality and reliability of information we see online? We're going to get there by working with researchers. We're going to get there by working with media literacy organizations, and we have a very strong, and very real business incentive to get this right on our end.
Absolutely. And the privacy comment, you're like right up Cory's alley. In fact, Cory will be publishing a paper here shortly on the need for national data security and data privacy legislation with us here at our street. But I wanted to just ask sort of a broader question. This is to you all. As you, from all of your seats, we do have the concept that, in a free marketplace of ideas, inevitably the better idea will win out. But, are we seeing that? Is that where we're going? Even with all of the efforts of the platforms, and I agree, you're making, significant improvements on all the algorithms and trying to use tools like OSoMe's, Botslayer and Hoaxy and all of that. But are we going in the right direction? Is it improving, or does it feel like, to me, it almost feels like we're still going a little bit backwards? Go ahead, Phil, anyone can take it.
Sure. I think this idea of the marketplace of ideas is that both you and Cory mentioned is a really important one to analyze. And maybe that helps answer your question, whether we're going forward or backward. A marketplace needs rules. And I think that for marketplaces that we understand well, like financial marketplaces, we kind of understand that. And so we have very good rules. And if you break those rules, the market does not work well. Marketplace of ideas is an abstract concept from Milton from a few centuries ago. So it's not something that we understand as well as markets of stocks or bonds and so on and so forth. But you do need rules, and so this idea that the best idea will win is based upon the fact that ideas compete fairly, so that a consumer can choose which idea do I like better. In other words, you assume that people are informed and they can access different sources of information, and then they can choose which one they find more convincing. All the discussion that we're having today and that we've been having for the last few years is about manipulation and misinformation. And those are ways in which the market is broken. Okay, if I can tell you that there is a piece of news, but it's not real news, I just made it up, but I can make it look like it's a legitimate news sources, I'm cheating, I'm breaking the market. If I can create a bunch of inauthentic accounts and create the impression that lots of people like me, when in fact it's not true, I control those accounts or like my ideas, then I'm cheating, I'm breaking the marketplace of ideas. If I can flood the system, if I can create thousands and thousands of posts that create the impression that lots of people, or that this is something that you should pay attention to, and I'm hacking people's cognitive biases to pay attention to what they think is important based on the fact that other people are paying attention to it. So AstroTurf, if I can do that, I can also cheat, and the system is broken in that way. And so I think that as social media platforms have evolved and have become part of our normal life and our ways to access information, as the cost of information has been lowered, also the cost of abuse and manipulation has been lowered. And so we don't have a fair marketplace of ideas. And so despite, so I agree that platforms are doing a lot to try and address this. Perhaps initially they were not super quick to realize these threats, but eventually they did. And they're doing a lot, and I give them credit for it. But like Pik-Mai says, it's an arms race. So yeah, we're building some countermeasures, but then abusers are also getting better at the abuse. And so right now we cannot talk about a good marketplace of ideas in which the best ideas will win until we fix these issues. Right now, I can very easily right now manipulate this system, and so if you assume that the marketplace of ideas works, then of course the answer is If you have bad ideas, the answer is more ideas, right? Just more speech. If you don't like the speech, more speech. That is not a solution that works, in my opinion, in today's social media, because more speech just means everybody can just flood the market and it will be just a mess and you don't know whom to trust. So we need to figure out what those rules are. I don't know whether some of that will come from government regulation, some of it will come from platforms that will continue to set up better rules and enforcement of those rules and for moderation. But certainly I would say that we need to kind of push back against the idea that we have an efficient marketplace of ideas, because we don't.
Fair enough. So Rob and Todd, I'm gonna go to you two for sort of to finish up the conversation as we're running out of time. So Rob, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I don't know that we have the tools to answer the question about whether things are getting better or worse right now, because we don't have good metrics and we don't have a good understanding of what we're actually trying to do, what success looks like. But my intuition is that we're moving actually in the right direction, based especially on some of the things that I think we've seen coming out of the major platforms and the ways that they are talking more about the way that they're treating information, they're treating accounts that are potentially spreading the mis and the disinformation. I think that is all, to me, symptomatic or emblematic of the fact that we're moving, or the notion that we're moving in the right direction. But again, we need to understand what success means, what we're trying to achieve, and we need to figure out ways to measure whether we're making progress on that. And I don't think the collective we, whether it's the government or I'm not sure about the platforms or sort of independent researchers, necessarily have a great sense of any of those three things.
I feel like you're just saying Bureau of Cyber Statistics, and I love it. I'm just going to clap. All right, Todd, and then
thank you again for having me as a part of this conversation. Thank you to the attendees for such thought-provoking questions. I legitimately do believe that, so I'm going to need to push back on your premise a little bit, because I do think we are clearly moving in a better direction. And if you look at where we were even, let's say 14, 15 months ago, since then, Twitter has rolled out a number of policies to promote the health of our platform, including taking action on coordinated harmful activity or QAnon. We have rolled on all of those tools and product interventions on elections mis and disinformation that I mentioned earlier. And to take the COVID example, in the last year, we've challenged more than 11.7 million accounts and removed more than 32,000 tweets worldwide. So I think we're doing this in from a place of honesty and saying that we are learning that this is an undertaking that requires some humility and some learning on all sides. And but we're doing it from a place of transparency and publishing our rules, publishing our strike enforcement system, and publishing our reports in our Twitter Transparency Center. So we welcome the collaboration. We welcome the opportunity to speak today, and we look forward to staying in conversation about these important issues.
Well, thank you so much. So Phil, Todd, Pik-Mai, Rob, and Cory, thank you so much for joining us today, and all of our attendees. We appreciate you coming in and listening to the discussion. Please check out, if you want to watch this again on the R Street YouTube channel, you can feel free to check this out and send it along if you're interested. So thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.